this is Jessica William, and you're listening to UC3P.
Welcome to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. This is UC3P, our eponymously named podcast on policy, politics, and current affairs. My name is David Raban, and I'm the production manager for what we like to call the main page. Before we get into today's interview, I want to recognize a few things. First, you may have noticed that we are publishing this episode later than expected. The reason is that I came down with some symptoms a couple weeks ago, and they were consistent with COVID-19, the global pandemic which has been sweeping the world. I'm feeling better now, and for all of you out there who are feeling ill, all of us at the main page and UC3P are wishing you a quick and easy recovery. Second, this is not a normal time. Our society is facing a test we have not faced in more than 100 years. Our economy is collapsing in front of our eyes. Our government is struggling to meet the scope of the problem. Our loved ones are getting sick. And if you felt strange, nervous, scared, or lonely in the past weeks, trust me, you are not alone. Finally, I want to let you know that we will be changing our planned production schedule to deal with this timely crisis. We had planned really interesting interviews and miniseries, and rest assured, you'll still get to hear them. But starting next week, we will be providing special coverage of issues related to the coronavirus so that you can be informed and prepared. Today, we are very excited to bring you a very, very special interview. Our guest today is Martin Joseph, a jazz composer and pianist who lives in Santiago, Chile. I spoke with Mr. Joseph 2 years ago when I traveled to Chile with the University of Chicago Law School's International Immersion program to study copyright law. I want to be upfront with you. This interview has almost nothing to do with public policy. Instead, it's a rather lighthearted interview about jazz, music, and life. We thought this would be a good spring break episode for you all. Considering everything that's going on, it's a great episode if you need something to help you take your mind off the world. By the way, I'm going to announce the tracks as they play, and if you want to find the music, you can find it in the show notes. The track you're currently hearing is Chiaroscuro from the 1997 album Mystery Box. Now, let's get straight into the interview. Without further ado, here's jazz composer and pianist Martin Joseph. Hey podcasters, welcome to a very special episode. My name is David Raban, and today I have the great fortune of speaking with Martin Joseph. Martin Joseph is a jazz pianist, composer, and professor. He's been playing music since the 1960s, including jazz, swing, and bop. He was born in the United Kingdom. For the last 2 decades, he has lived, worked, and performed in Santiago, Chile. While a professor at Universidad de Chile's Music Conservatory, he created the Pacific Ensemble. He also wrote multiple albums worth of music. You can watch a documentary performance of Martin Joseph performing with Pacific Ensemble through Vimeo, and you can catch all of these links on our website. His newest album is called The Day of the Rainbow. Martin Joseph, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
I'm delighted, David. Delighted to meet you and your Chicago friends, and thank you for coming to talk to me.
Thank you. And I should also say it's been wonderful having your wife helping us, Maria Inez, and also my friend Ray Andrada. Unless I'm mistaken, you were born in 1938.
That's right.
What is your first memory of music?
Well, it probably dates back to before I can remember, really, because the thing is, my father, who did other things in life, he was a businessman, but he played jazz piano very beautifully. He played like in the style of jazz pianists of the 30s, I would say. He admired Teddy Wilson, a very great pianist of the 30s, who played with Benny Goodman. And later he came to admire Oscar Peterson also, and he played very beautifully. He played popular songs of the 20s and 30s, and he always played them the same. He didn't improvise an awful lot, but he had his own little variations on each song, and he had a beautiful touch. So I listened to him, all my childhood. And then, of course, the being a piano in the house, my mother, who liked classical music, she wanted me to learn the piano. And at 4, I was taking lessons. So I was playing classical music, and I've maintained that love of classical music all my life. I mean, now I love classical music, obviously jazz, improvised music, but also the musics of the world. I'm a little bit less of a rock man, but I love blues. But I'm beginning to catch up with some things that I didn't know. That's the brief answer.
Do you remember the first piece of music you ever played?
Well, that's a bit difficult. No, because anyway, you start with scales. But I remember my piano teacher had me writing music at about 5 with sort of scrawled notes. I remember that my mother, who kept everything, she had kept it. After she passed away, they disappeared. But at a certain point, I got on to one of the easy pieces of Bach, because Bach did a lot of teaching, and therefore he wrote some very easy pieces, which I think don't need much editing for children.
When did you decide that you wanted to be a musician?
That's a complicated one. I think I knew that I wanted to be a musician, I should guess from about 14, something like that. My father, who was very traditional, and because he thought, not without reason, that being a lawyer would be a much safer way of earning a living than being a musician. And for some reason, he thought that I should go on with my Latin and Greek. I mean, in those days, jobs in England were very much kind of, you got a job if you knew the right people and went to the right school and all that kind of stuff. And so he seemed to think that a good training in Latin and Greek would be a good start for a lawyer. And he wanted me to go to universities and study Latin and Greek. And I spent a great year actually, in Cambridge studying Latin and Greek. And then I decided that I'd do a bit better with something more modern. And I went down to London for one reason or another. And I studied French and German and history of art, history of visual arts. But I didn't study music. And so I've never been to what they call a conservatoire. I don't know what you call it in the United States. So my music training, but good classical training, but very little music theory. So I'm totally self-taught as a composer, for example. And as a jazz musician, I reckon, my conservatoire was, for many years, playing with people better than me. That's the way you get better, And I was able to play with some wonderful musicians. I mean, there were some very good musicians in England when I was sort of starting to play. When I played, I had a kind of dance band come jazz band at school till I was 17, 18. But then from about 20, I was playing in a pub on the outskirts of London as part of what was called a house rhythm section. In other words, the piano, bass and drums were musicians who had the gig, had the job. And we played about 4 times a week. But it was always with a guest player who was always, a top player in London. And there were very good players, and they were all kind of styles. There was very little money. Little money means no time no musicians are not going to rehearse if there's no money. So you had to know the tunes. And if the first time you stumbled a bit, well, that was all right. But there was a pool of musicians, but they came round again. By the time that they came a second time, you better know those pieces. So it was, I'm playing with different people from the swing style of, somebody who played like Ben Webster, to somebody who was playing pretty well free jazz. with all the stars in between. I mean, that was for about 5 years, and that was my conservatory.
Can you remember an early experience of a performance you had done that maybe it didn't go quite right, or even worse, something went horribly wrong, and then how you recovered from that? Was there anything like that that sticks in your mind from earlier on in your performing days?
Well, I've always been good at making mistakes, and it still is. The only thing that's changed is that I think I've more or less learned to accept them as part of making jazz. It doesn't matter. Usually, it doesn't matter too much. But then, I suffered a lot, and especially as I was playing with, as I said, with people who were some of them superb musicians. I went home feeling very, very bad, But at the same time, if they were really good, you got a lot from them, Two of my I consider my masters of musicians that are not really very known outside Britain. They both passed away now, but one is Harry Beckett, who was a trumpeter from Barbados, black, and he had so much swing and didn't sound like anybody else. And another was a Scottish tenor player called Bobby Wellens, who, to my mind, is a master. He had listened to Sonny Rollins, to Stan Getz, but he sounded like nobody but himself. And he had a kind of rather piercing high notes, I think influenced by the bagpipes. He also didn't sound like anybody else, and he always surprised me. And I learned so much from these people, And they became my friends, and we went on communicating or sometimes making music together over the years.
When did you realize that you could do composition and that you could be a composer?
I don't think I ever really thought that I couldn't. Maybe that was a good thing. If I'd thought about it too much, I wouldn't have done it.
I've read that your first record was an eponymous record titled Martin Joseph, and that you recorded it in 1973 in Rome.
My goodness, you've done a lot of research.
If I've gotten my dates correct, you were 35 roughly at the time.
Yes.
What made you ready to publish an album, even your first album, under your own name?
The opportunity. When I was in England, I lived in England till I was about 30, 32. It was quite difficult to record, and I wasn't very well known. And then I went to Italy in 1970. And then I became a bit more better known. And there was a chap who was starting a record label. The way he worked was basically that he wanted people to make only original compositions, which I did with my compositions and compositions also by the bass player and drummer, both very good musicians, Italians, who played with me. So they were mainly my pieces, but some by my companions. And the way this chap worked was that the producer of the disc publishes it. You could put inverted commas around that, because publishing it really just means making a disc with it. So he takes half the money. And he had contacts. It's very, very Italian in a way. I love Italy, but there are things I can laugh about in Italy. The way he works is he had lots of contacts in the radio, and so he got these pieces played a lot. I don't expect he paid us a penny, but the assumption was that we would get money from the composer's rights, and we did, only because he got them played a lot, and because he got them played a lot on the RAI, which is a public radio, which paid. I mean, these days, most radio stations are private, I would say, or you could say independent, and mostly they don't pay performing rights, or composer's rights. But there, they did.
Is there a track off of your eponymous record that you still think about today, from your earlier work?
Oh yeah, it was a nice record. There's a piece called "The Mermaid," which was actually, you could say, represents my first contact with this country, because when